June 1984, just outside Cincinnati, Ohio. A 40-year-old pipe fitter goes missing at the plant where he works. What is believed to have happened to him is downright horrifying. During the next 40 years, revelations about the plant would force it to permanently close, but the mystery of Dave Bocks still lingers today. So, if this is the kind of content you're into, hit that like button. And make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. So now, on to the story. David Anthony Bocks was born on November 4th, 1944, in Staten Island, New York, to Anne and Russell Bocks. He was the middle child among 3 boys. While Dave was still quite young, the family moved from New York to Ohio. Unfortunately, Dave suffered an accident while he was young that led him to being legally blind in his right eye. This would later prevent him from serving his country in Vietnam. In 1964, when Dave was 20 years old, he met the woman who would eventually become his wife. They got married and had 3 children, Tony, Casey, and Matt, but they would later divorce, which hit Dave pretty hard. This led to some tough times, and reached a point where he attempted to take his own life. Despite these hardships, Dave stayed incredibly close to his now ex-wife and children. Dave was a typical blue-collar guy, preferring work that was hands-on. He worked for a time at the Cincinnati Industrial Machinery Company, before moving on to the National Lead Company of Ohio, also known as NLO. At that time, NLO was handling the management and operation of the Fernald Feed Materials Production Center. Covering a little more than 1,000 acres, this facility contained 9 specialized plants and was located in the small town of Fernald, roughly 20 miles northwest of Cincinnati. The plant opened in 1951 and fell under the ownership of the Department of Energy. This wasn't known to the public, nor was its main purpose of producing uranium fuel cores for nuclear weapons. Employees were explicitly told to keep quiet about it, and they were assured that it was a low-level radiation plant with no immediate risk to them or residents in the surrounding area. Dave Bocks was hired by NLO as a pipe fitter in 1981. His job was to inspect and maintain the equipment throughout the various plants. Dave worked the graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m., as there was no production during that time, allowing him to work undisturbed. Dave was held in high regard by his co-workers and supervisors, and described as someone who got along with everyone, especially his best friend, Harry Easterling. Even though they worked in different parts of the plant, they both worked the graveyard shift, and so they carpooled to and from work. The night of June 18, 1984, was no different. They met at a local restaurant, as was normal. When they arrived at NLO, they changed into their work gear, left their personal items, which for Dave included his keys, and went to the maintenance room to get their assignments for the night. Dave's was to inspect a pump over in Plant 8. As their shift wrapped up, Harry gathered his belongings to leave. He saw Dave's things exactly as he had left them, including his keys in his toolbox, but there was no sign of Dave. Harry waited for a while, but on that day he had to leave. He was scheduled to walk through a house he planned to buy that morning, and needed to leave. He left a note on Dave's toolbox, saying he left to go to his showing, and would come back to get him afterward. But when Harry returned, he found his note exactly where he had left it. So he started asking around if anyone had seen Dave, but no one had, which frustrated Harry, but he figured there had to be a sensible explanation. Eventually, Harry left, but left another note saying he would meet him at the restaurant that night. When Harry arrived at the restaurant to carpool, he saw Dave's car in the parking lot. Dave wasn't around, so Harry assumed he was inside getting food to take to work, which wasn't unusual at all. But as Harry waited outside, he leaned up against Dave's car and found that the hood was cold. The vehicle had clearly not moved since Dave parked it there 24 hours earlier. So Harry headed into work, still thinking there had to be a plausible explanation. But when Harry arrived at NLO and couldn't find Dave anywhere, he went to security and reported Dave missing. Security quickly found that Dave had not punched out from the previous shift, and after asking around, found that Dave had last been seen by a coworker heading towards Plant 4 at around 5 a.m. on June 19th. Shortly after 5, something strange happened in Plant 6. This plant housed a uranium processing furnace containing molten uranium salts that were kept at a precise and constant temperature of 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. The furnace temperature unexpectedly and suddenly dropped by 28 degrees before returning to its normal temperature. This indicated that something foreign had entered the furnace. About 2.5 hours later, employees noticed an unusual odor coming from the furnace. Notably, an employee informed his supervisor that he thought he saw something inside. Although the supervisor didn't see anything significant inside the furnace, the situation took a more ominous turn as word spread around the facility that Dave Bocks was missing, considering that the furnace was large enough for a person to fit into. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Office was notified, and they ordered the furnace to be shut down. However, the furnace took 3 days to sufficiently cool before investigators could conduct a thorough search. While they waited, they searched the surrounding areas of the plant, finding what appeared to be a bone fragment on the lip of the furnace. After the furnace cooled, investigators meticulously combed through its contents, pulling out a steel toe boot fragment, parts of a walkie-talkie, a set of keys, eyeglasses, and more bone fragments. The keys and glasses were identified as belonging to Dave Bocks. It appeared that Dave had in fact died inside the furnace. The sheriff's office ruled his apparent death as a suicide, assuming that he jumped in voluntarily. However, several parts of this theory just didn't add up. Dave had recently got groceries, he paid his monthly bills, and was planning an upcoming vacation for him and his children. Oddly, Harry Easterling distinctly remembers seeing Dave's keys where he left them in his toolbox at midnight on June 20th, which meant that the keys couldn't have gone into the furnace with Dave Bocks in the early morning hours of June 19th. So how did the keys end up in there? Harry believes that someone threw them in after. He remembered that after Dave was reported missing on the 20th, a supervisor confiscated the keys and locked up Dave's toolbox. Another employee recalled seeing Dave having an apparently serious conversation with a supervisor in a pickup parked outside of one of the plants on the 19th. The truck's windows were rolled up, so the employee couldn't tell what was said. But just the fact that the windows were up seemed odd, as the weather on the night of the 19th was especially hot and humid. As DNA testing wasn't an option back then, there was no definitive way to establish that the bone fragments belonged to Dave Bocks. Nevertheless, his family decided to ask that he be legally declared dead, which a judge ordered in March of 1986, despite pretty much everyone being certain Dave died inside that furnace. 6 months later, a simple broken dust collector would lead to the downfall of NLO. Due to this broken dust collector, 300 pounds of uranium oxide had been released into the atmosphere. It would later be revealed that the plant had released over 200 tons of radioactive dust over the past 30 years, contaminating both the air and the local water supply. The plant's method of disposing of solid radioactive waste involved simply dumping it into a large pit on the property. Additionally, They stored the liquid radioactive waste inside massive tanks, one of which cracked and was leaking, a problem that NLO never addressed. Shockingly, the Department of Energy knew of these issues, but did nothing to correct them. In 1986, control of the plant shifted away from NLO, but this was a case of too little, too late. Irreversible damage had been done, and residents were already experiencing health issues. In a class action lawsuit against NLO and the Department of Energy, local residents received a settlement of $78 million. NLO employees received $20 million, and the state of Ohio received $20 million. The plant was permanently shut down in 1989. The land where the plant once stood remains unsuitable for human habitation and is likely to remain that way for a long, long time. So how does Dave Bocks figure into all this? There's widespread speculation that Dave knew about all of the unsafe and illegal practices and paid for it with his life. People think that Dave was getting ready to go public with this information, and someone in charge caught wind of it and couldn't let that happen. The belief is that Dave was somehow incapacitated, bound with a wire later found in the furnace, and then lowered into the 1300-degree inferno. But this is only a theory. No part of this has ever been proven. But if this is what actually happened, one can only hope that Dave Bocks was either unconscious or already dead when he was lowered into that furnace. The idea of someone realizing that they were being lowered into a 1300-degree furnace and being unable to do anything about it is undeniably one of the most horrifying ways for someone to meet their demise. The truth of what really happened to Dave Bocks remains elusive, and it seems unlikely that we will ever have a clear understanding. Today, his family is still waiting to lay him to rest. The bone fragments, which are believed to be his remains, are currently in a sealed drum on the closed plant site, still too toxic to be buried into the ground. We can only hope that someday someone comes forward with information, and that in the past nearly 40 years, the Bocks family has been able to find some sort of closure and peace. What's your take on what happened? We'd love to hear your ideas in the comments below. So, that's going to do it for this episode of the Sheldrake Files. As always, if you enjoyed the story, and this is the kind of content you're into, hit that like button, and make sure you subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. So from all of us here at the Sheldrake Files, thank you for watching, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll catch you next time.